I have found to be the case so often is that in business, we lack clarity of expectations. A leader will come in and say, okay, why didn't this happen? And the team will start pointing fingers, going immediately defensive, saying, well, I didn't know what you wanted. We thought we had this thing. And actually, probably in most cases, the team is on point. And if the leader were to self-reflect and really think deeply about this, it wouldn't be too hard to come to the conclusion of, yeah, I thought that everybody shared my wavelength on this, but I never communicated the expectation effectively. And so the root cause of why we didn't achieve success is me. I didn't set the expectations right. And in the absence of expectations, it's very difficult to measure. It's very hard for us to effectively measure against an unspoken expectation, and it's impossible to debrief. I shouldn't say impossible. It makes really the debrief outcome is I should have set the expectation. So next time I'm going to do that.
Cujo, Robert Cujo Teschner, as you're affectionately called, I think, by many people you interact with. Thank you for coming on the show. It's greatly appreciated. We'll hopefully get into how you got the name Cujo at some point. But for those who aren't familiar, you are the founder of VMax Group, based here in St. Louis, Missouri. You're a keynote speaker, leadership consultant, and author of a couple of books. Debrief to Win, I think, is your most recent book, available on Amazon and on your website. And you're also a former U.S. Air Force fighter pilot. So a bit of, I think, a unique background for a speaker and business consultant. And I think where you get a lot of your strength from in terms of leadership and your ability to coach. Is that fair to say?
I think all of that is fair to say. And let me begin by saying, Raj, thank you so much for welcoming me here and for being such a gracious host. It's a joy to spend some time with you. You're doing exceptional work in the world of podcasting, and I'm glad to be here. And very nice introduction. The fighter pilot piece was the one that I'm so grateful for. I had the privilege as a young professional to learn from really, really good leaders how to team effectively, how to navigate disruption as a team effectively. And I'm very, very fortunate to be able to now translate that and bring that forward into the business realm. So I'm excited for our conversation today.
I'd love to learn a little bit about how you grew up, where you grew up. Before we started recording here, you mentioned you have a very interesting multicultural background. So would love to hear a little bit of the family history and then why you decided to join the military.
Wonderful. Okay, good. So as is the case with so many American stories, product of immigration, my mother was a war refugee, World War II. Her family fled by foot out of Zagreb. They were in fear of Stalin's forces coming in and taking Croatia by storm, which they would eventually do. The journey to freedom was a long one. It took about 14 years for the family, my mom, her sisters, their parents, to make their way to the United States. They did so by way of Brazil. Finally got a visa after over a decade and a half of working towards it, came to the United States. My grandfather, with 2 PhDs in 2 different languages, ends up as a janitor in Cleveland. So very, very familiar story to so many of your listeners, probably. And ultimately, the family found their way to St. Louis. Their naturalization as American citizens was captured in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. There's pictures of them in their living room celebrating them becoming American citizens. And so I'd say from that side of the family, very much learned to never take what we have for granted. From that side of the family, really learned the cost of what it takes to have the country that we have, and a tremendous appreciation for what America is. And while my mother was going through college here in St. Louis, she fell in love with a man who his family came from Leipzig, Germany back in 1907, but eventually made their way to St. Louis the same sort of way. They fell in love. Just so happens that Dad had a passion for military things, had a passion for specifically the United States Air Force. He joined the Air Force. And thus I was born into an Air Force family of immigrants. And from the earliest of ages, all that I could think of is wanting to do what Dad did.
You mentioned the the American ideal and really feeling strongly, passionately, and I do as well, about this being a special place on the planet and sort of wanting to protect that, is what you alluded to.
That's right.
Is that the way you were thinking when you were a teen or in your early 20s, and I'm assuming just entering the military, or is that something you reflected back on later in life? And I'm just curious about that, because it sounds like it could have gone either way. It could have been that, or it could have been like, this is my family and this is what we do type of thing.
Yeah, right. So we always talked about what a privilege it was to be American. At every family get together, it was reemphasized how fortunate we were, how blessed we were to be part of this. And from mom's side, that was even more visceral, because they had experienced such difficulties in making their way over here, and so they were very passionate about what it was that we had. On dad's side, just the whole notion of service was so critical. It was what he did from the earliest of ages. He was in ROTC as a student here, an undergraduate student, and by the time that he came back and went to law school at Washington University, he was already commissioned officer. And you overlay that with watching the movie Star Wars when I was a 4-year-old, and having this idea of a way to serve, really exciting, space fighting and X-Wings was fascinating to me. Figured if I could find some way to duplicate that here on planet Earth, I'd want to. And so all that came together to create within me an idea and an understanding that this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to go out. I wanted to serve. I wanted to continue to help protect what it is that we've got here. And I wanted to be part of a really unique entity. And what I saw with this unique entity called the United States Air Force was really an extension of our family. I felt growing up that the Air Force was my family. And when my father retired from his career, I felt a little bit let down. I was disappointed, and I didn't want to give it up. And so a couple of years later, I immediately jumped in as soon as I could, 17 years old, and went off to the United States Air Force Academy.
And how did that look for you? Were you traveling all over the country, all over the world? And I'm very curious to hear how you developed as an adult, as a human being, as a leader through that journey.
Yeah, great question. Born in South Carolina, made our way to St. Louis while Dad was in law school, then moved to Texas, then California, then Germany, then Montgomery, Alabama. So I got a chance to see a little bit of the world. And we went to Germany at a time when us not being German stood out. And I went to German schools for 3 years. So I really stood out as being the oddball. I didn't play soccer. I didn't wear Adidas back in the day. We weren't as globally connected as we are today back in the early 80s. And so it took a little while to kind of break through into that. Once I did break through, and as an American student in a German school, expectation is I speak German fluent from day one, which I didn't. So there was a huge learning curve. But once I learned the language, and once I started to think like my classmates, I gained an appreciation for the world that I would not have had if I had grown up in one place all my life. And I really appreciated that. I took so much from my 3 years, 5th through 7th grades in Germany, mid-'80s, that affected me for the rest of my life, and definitely affected the way that I lead. And I think part of it is an appreciation for what it is that I don't know. And there's so much that I don't know. Part of it is an appreciation for there's all kinds of different perspectives about the same unique problem. And I probably want to be more open to those perspectives than not. And I'm grateful, so grateful for that part of the journey. I remember when we left St. Louis, saying goodbye to all the family, heading off to Germany. I was so disappointed. I was in tears. I asked my parents over and over again if they would just leave me behind and allow me to grow up with my cousins, and didn't want to go so far away. That was the best thing I ever did. And long-winded way of saying I wanted that for my kids as well. Figured someday if I had the opportunity to be able to do the same thing for them, it would be a great thing. And fortunately, was able to duplicate that experience, living in both Greece and Germany with our family, having children in both countries, and exposing more children to those countries, which was exceptional.
You talk a lot about debriefing, bringing that military debriefing to the business world. And of course, your book, Debrief to Win, is partly about that concept. And when you're in the military, are you I know you're around leaders and you're expected to act a certain way and perform at a certain level, but are you being shaped, molded to become a leader yourself? And, if you're a part of a debrief or something else, are there opportunities for you to continue to grow as a leader and not just within your position, if that makes sense?
100%. And my experience in the Air Force was basically a leadership acceleration experience from day one until the day that I hung up my spurs for the last time, starting as a 17-year-old at the Air Force Academy. The Air Force Academy is a good school, really good school. More important than the education is it's a leadership laboratory. And the whole intent is to graduate people who are capable of leading day one upon graduation, commissioned as a second lieutenant. And the journey into becoming the leader that you aspire to be never ends. And you're always being tested. You're placed into places where you're uncomfortable. You're taken away from the comfort zones and placed into a place that you have no experience with, working with a team dynamic that you've never had before. And it's all good. And how it is that you manage that is up to you. And some people do it better than others. But the takeaway is that you learn how to lead at a very, very young age. I was 20. I was reflecting on this with some of our students, one of our courses here recently. 27 years old, responsible for all U.S. forces flying over southern Iraq. As a young captain, having general officers reporting to you is a really unique thing. And in that world, it's just the way that it is. You don't even think twice about it. That's just another day on the job. And the output of that is that you're very comfortable in a range of environments. You're comfortable kind of taking command of the room. You're comfortable guiding a team successfully through some really difficult things. I mean, placing others' lives in harm's way, that's a tough thing to be called to do. Doing so effectively and bringing them all back, that's a really rewarding but challenging thing to do. That's what we do all the time, especially in fighter aviation. And so I'm grateful for that conditioning. I'll never stop learning how to lead, that's for sure. But I got a good head start, courtesy of everything that I went through. And the debrief is the way that we as a team get together and learn. No mission is finished until we've learned why it went the way that it did. And the output of that learning isn't to look backwards and punish, but rather to help us all have confidence that applying what we've learned to the next iteration is going to make us that much better.
I think it would be helpful if you don't mind going over, it could be at a high level or it could be, we can get in the weeds if you'd like, a military debrief versus what you recommend for a business organization. Because like you mentioned, in a military environment, it's very high stakes. Every mistake matters. And that's not to say in the business world, every mistake doesn't matter, but missing your revenue target is a little different. So can we talk about those two scenarios and in your mind, or how you teach or consult with organizations, what those look like?
Absolutely. And here's what's interesting, Raj. There's no difference. The stakes being what they are, the process remains the same, and the outcome is the exact same. We're here to try to learn how to have a better iteration the next time around. So the process is 100% the same process that we'd use post-event in the military where something really bad happened. We lost somebody, as we would in a business setting where we might have missed the mark by $1 million. The process is the same. The tone, attitude, the way that we enter in with childlike curiosity, all that stays the same. In fact, the demeanor, posture has to be the same, because in both cases, in order to learn effectively, we as leaders have to learn to become great mentors, coaches, great teachers. And so there's really no difference. And that's the beautiful thing about it. I was worried, frankly, at the translation early on before I'd ever had a swing of the bat in the business setting. And I found that was a waste of my time. The worry was totally unwarranted, unfounded. The good news for us is the same process works in all domains equally well. So we can take the debrief, we can apply it at home, we can apply it at home with our kids, with our spouses, with those we love. We can apply it as coaches in the sports world, coaching kid sports, adult teams, it doesn't matter. There's literally no domain that doesn't benefit from the exact same process and approach.
What are some of the guidelines or guardrails for running a successful debrief? We've never done one as an organization, and I'm sure you find that most organizations don't. We have guidelines, guardrails for running successful meetings, whether it's a daily huddle or something else. Do you have tips like that you can share for a debrief?
100%.
Okay.
And the biggest thing that I have to highlight is that we have to know what the expectations are in order for any of this to work. And what I have found to be the case so often is that in business, we lack clarity of expectations. A leader will come in and say, okay, why didn't this happen? And the team will start pointing fingers, going immediately defensive, saying, well, I didn't know what you wanted. We thought we had this thing. And actually, probably in most cases, the team is on point. And if the leader were to self-reflect and really think deeply about this, it wouldn't be too hard to come to the conclusion of, yeah, I thought that everybody shared my wavelength on this, but I never communicated the expectation effectively. And so the root cause of why we didn't achieve success is me. I didn't set the expectations right. And in the absence of expectations, it's very difficult to measure. It's very hard for us to effectively measure against an unspoken expectation, and it's impossible to debrief. I shouldn't say impossible. It makes really the debrief outcome is I should have set the expectation. So next time I'm going to do that. And that's the most important tip. And it seems so obvious and logical, but it's so underapplied. In fact, just yesterday, we were at a kids event, and folks were singing. Sorry to date stamp it. It was a Christmas event, and it was a Christmas pageant, and there was a little choir that was singing off to the side as people were coming into the venue, and people were talking, and it was a very festive atmosphere. And then the event organizer got up on stage and said, "Hey, listen, everybody, I need you all to be quiet. We've got a choir going on right now. You need to listen and be respectful." And it was really kind of abrupt, and everybody felt very, very awkward. And there was this stunned silence, and the choir kept on going, but the whole mood and atmosphere was a little bit off. And my wife looked at me and she goes, "That expectation was never set. Nobody here was doing anything maliciously. Nobody here was trying to. In fact, it was perfect background music for the atmosphere that had been organically created." And I promise you, if everybody knew that the expectation was for us to focus our attention on this thing, that they would have done so gladly without any, but nobody ever set that expectation. So it's really hard to come in off the top rope and crush people for not meeting an unspoken expectation. And it was the most recent application or misapplication of this principle that I could offer you. It happens all the time.
And that makes a lot of sense. As you were saying that, I was thinking of scenarios within our company where we failed as an organization or as leaders, managers to set expectations, and then we're frustrated with the results we got when we didn't make it. The clarity didn't exist. So to me, you come across as someone who's cool, calm, collected, and warm. That's the vibe that I get from our brief interaction. Is that your leadership style? So, and the reason why I ask that is because if we're setting expectations, I would imagine we don't want to come across as cold and robotic, if that makes sense. I think empathy is still important in the workplace. So do you have a leadership style that you try to help people with? And two, is there a tip for delivering expectations?
Yes. Okay. So 100%. I work very hard to overcome my natural tendency towards rushing to judgment and to being probably the harshest person in the room. Like, left to my own devices, that's me. And I've found that though there's some degree of effectiveness, for example, yesterday when the event organizer came in and said, "Need you to pay attention," it was effective in that people were immediately quiet and they did start focusing. But I don't think big picture effectiveness was achieved. I think you had a lot of people that were a little bit off-put, felt some degree of shame there. Like, why did you make this so bad? Probably left with a bad taste in their mouth. And that's not the style of leadership that I was given when I was a young lieutenant. So what I saw, especially when I was in combat, and this is the part that had a profound influence on me. Young lieutenant, brand new as an F-15 pilot, flying in harm's way. The stakes are much higher than they were back home in training, where it was still dangerous. But in combat, it was a little bit more so. My leaders were always so poised and calm. And it came across over the radios because we all flew single seat fighters. But over the radios, the radio calls were always, Kong flight. Let's come 180 left. Whereas in a typical setting, even in a training mission, Kong, let's go 180 left. A little bit more forceful. In combat, interestingly, it was a little bit more calm. And it was the way that the leader was projecting to all of this. We've got this thing. Do not worry. All shall be well. And I found that that's a generally good approach to apply in most settings. There's a time and a place for everything. Leadership is situational, not static. But if I had to default to anything, I'll try to project some calm. That was inculcated in us in pilot training. And we'd start every day, Raj, of pilot training, which was 13 months of constant learning, high stakes learning, with a stand-up where the flight commander, the senior person in the room, would present a situation. For instance, all right, everybody, today you're out there flying in the airspace, you're doing a loop, you're halfway through the loop, you're upside down, fully inverted, and you realize you've got a right engine fire. Lieutenant Teschner, you have the aircraft. What do you do? So you got to stand up in front of all of your peers, all of the instructors, and you got to handle this thing correctly. And if you don't handle it correctly, you're not flying that day. So the stakes are pretty high. What were we taught? Sir, the first thing I'm going to do is maintain aircraft control. Then I'm going to analyze the situation and take appropriate action. And then finally, I'm going to land as soon as conditions permit. So no matter what the circumstance was, you always started that way. And that was conditioning us to, when we're out there flying, make sure that we don't fly into a mountain solving this problem, making a much worse problem in the process. And then let's be very calm and measured in addressing things to make sure that we don't accidentally shut down the wrong engine, making a bad problem infinitely worse. And always with an eye towards, let's get this thing on the ground. Let's land this puppy. Let's get through this thing effectively. So I think I've hit the fundamental portions of your first question. In the process, I forgot the second question, but maybe that provides some clarity.
Yeah, that does. And you mentioned just the calmness that you were receiving over the radio. It sounds like being calm, being concise, those are important leadership traits. Having some degree of empathy, like we talked about. What are some leadership traits that, based on your experience in the military, but also your business consulting experience, we don't want to see in leaders? Or what are some of the common mistakes we see leaders make, or you see leaders make when you come and speak to or work with an organization?
You've twice mentioned empathy. That is such an important feature of a debrief done well. Putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes at the moment where they made the decision they made, considering the context within which they made the decision that they made, and giving them credit, even when the decision wasn't the best one, for being probably the best decision that they could have made given the context that they were in, with the ambition towards, hey, let's take this experience, build on it, and prepare you to make a better decision the next time. I think the biggest mistake, and I test this constantly in the workshops that we do, I get an opportunity to do so. Biggest mistake is to rush to judgment, make assumptions and rush to judgment. Make assumptions, which seems so obvious to not do, and rush to judgment, which folks who tell me coming in that they don't do these things fall victim to very easily. And it's interesting to watch. I think just fundamental human nature. And I know that as a person who's been in this world of training to lead, leading high performance teams, writing a book about the power of accountability used as a means of team learning, I'm the first to make assumptions and to rush to judgment. Left to my own devices, I have to push down those urges, I suppose you could say, so that I can lead the way that I intend to and not fall victim to the thing that hijacks us so often. Because when I make assumptions and rush to judge you, in so doing, I'm breaking trust with you. In so doing, I'm lowering my credibility with you. You as my teammate think less of me moving forward. And it's really hard to build that back up.
Cujo, it sounds like you're big on personal development. And as you've mentioned, you've worked hard to kind of create the person that you want to be. How do you think about personal development? Is it an ongoing pursuit? Do you have things that you apply to your day every single day? Anything you can share with us there, just based on your knowledge, wisdom?
Absolutely. I think back to when I was on the front lines, when I was flying, we basically had constant coaching. Like if I wasn't leading the mission, if I was just a member of the team, I was getting coached up by the leader of the mission that day. And then I got an opportunity to coach when I was the leader of the mission the next day. And so we're constantly either receiving or giving coaching, which I think really helped us to constantly improve and to learn in a world where nothing stays static. I mean, when you're talking force on force engagements, the bad guys are getting worse by the day. Our technology is only taking us so far. We've got to learn and adapt and innovate and do more with what we have. And so in that world, you can't stay static if you want to win in the future. I don't think that there's any difference between that life and the life of a business person. I mean, the world in which we're operating is complex and getting more so. The needs of the team are changing. They're evolving. I mean, I was having a conversation just this morning with a leader trying to manage the distributed workforce. Years into the process, still huge amounts of challenge with doing so because the workforce is constantly evolving. And so if we stay static, then we're falling behind. It's not that, we've arrived at some plateau and we're going to stay there. No. You're there and then you're kind of falling almost instantly unless you're pouring into yourself. So constant coaching is a necessity. Constant absorption of new information, also a necessity. And one of the places where I'm currently failing, and as we look in to the new year, again, sorry for date stamping.
No worries.
But as I personally look to the new year, I'm making a huge investment to me by committing to read more than I've read over the last 3 years, because I've fallen behind on that. And I've allowed myself to get complacent.
That makes a lot of sense. And to be honest with you, I'm also lacking when it comes to reading. I listen to audiobooks, but I do want to make it a point to unwind every single day by reading. And I will start with, I'm not kidding, I will start with Debrief to Win. I appreciate you bringing a copy. I plan to start doing it in the new year. Why not now? Why wait another couple weeks?
Outstanding. And I appreciate you saying that. This book was very, very easy to write because it was on my heart. Of all the things that I could have been tasked with teaching when I was an instructor at the Air Force Top Gun School, the fighter weapons school back in the day, now weapons instructor course, accountability was not the thing that I was looking to be tasked with. And it was just a function of timing. I just happened to be there at a time when they needed a new debrief instructor. They picked me. I was disappointed, but I wasn't going to say that because it was an honor to be called back to teach there. It ends up being one of the greatest things that's ever happened to me. In the course of learning what makes this work and teaching it at a very, very high level, I was gifted something that was going to be applicable for me and for the work that I was going to eventually do for the rest of my life. And I'm grateful for that. So it was easy to write. And what's very good about this is that it unpacks how it is that we've learned over the course of a century plus of doing it, to do it at a very high level that makes it a human process. So a lot of times when a business leader considers taking a military approach and applying it to their business, they're worried about, it's going to be so rigid, it's going to be so disciplined, it's going to be very hierarchical, it's going to cause people to want to leave because who wants to go through this? What I'll tell you is this book opens the doors to an incredibly human approach to human teaming. And of all the teams that I've ever been a part of, that I've ever been able to have a touch point into military business, I'd say probably the most empathetic, the most disciplined in terms of not rushing to judgment. The place where I felt most connected was in a high-performance military team. And I think if we can get some of that and bring that into all of the other teams that we're privileged to be on, it's a wonderful thing that only benefits literally everybody.
Is a part of a very strong team empowering each person to be able to make certain decisions versus having a top-down approach, if you will?
Almost every time that I go out and speak is this misunderstanding of the military paradigm, the doctrine of how it is that we run our teams. The expected environment from many business leaders is it is command and control. The leader says, everybody on the team salutes and does, and if you don't do, you're punished.
The stereotype is like sort of that drill instructor stereotype.
That's right. Realistically, the doctrine says we do need centralized commands. Like somebody does have to call the shots. So there's a leader whose job it is to call the shots. But in execution, it's decentralized. And the whole understanding is that the leader can't have their hands on everything always because of the speed at which we operate, because of the distances at which we're operating. So decision-making authority is actually delegated down to the lowest levels. And we expect that the folks on the front lines at the lowest levels are going to make high-quality decisions to advance our collective cause. And that is a doctrinal approach in the military. So that the net effect is I, as a 25-year-old fighter pilot, was delegated the decision-making authority in my own cockpit to decide what to do about a particular threat that I'm seeing on my radar scope. And if I decide that I need to hit the button that launches a missile at that blip, that's my call. I don't have to ask Mother May. I don't have to say, hey, what do you think, Raj? Let's put our heads together on that. No, it's like at the speeds we're operating, especially, that decision-making authority has been delegated to me. And so we're a very empowered workforce.
How are you thinking about the issue of somebody who's not a good cultural fit being given that type of authority or empowerment? So like, it could be a bad actor, or it could be someone that just is not caring of the mission of the organization.
Good. I think there's a sense many times in a business setting that we're obligated to keep all of our teammates together, and that somehow it's our burden to make sure that everybody eventually gets on board. And while I think that the general called heart-based idea there is a solid one, it doesn't work. I don't think everybody actually is a good cultural fit. I don't think everybody deserves to be on the team. And I don't think a leader is obligated to keep everybody on the team. And I've noticed in my work and business that a lot of times the leader can pinpoint the one person who's hijacking and derailing everything. When you ask, why is that person still here? Well, they've been around for a long time, or, they do this one thing really, really well, or, related somehow. And so there's another political dimension there tied to that, especially in family run businesses. And none of those is sufficient to justify the impact that it's having on the collective whole. So leadership is hard because one of the difficult things is to remove the person who can't really advance the collective mission. And the benefit of frequent debriefs is that the debrief's role is to highlight the truth of what's taking place here and to identify who it is that's preventing us from forward progress. So if we're having a debrief every week, and Raj, you as my leader, using a fact-based root cause analysis that identifies me, and oftentimes we say it's about the process, not the okay, it's me that's not following the standards around. It's me that's, no kidding, holding up forward progress. If I'm always the root cause of this thing, it becomes very clear that, if I'm not responding to the way forward, we need you to do this differently next time, Cujo. If I'm unwilling to do that, then you're going to be at some point unwilling to keep me here. And a debrief done correctly probably highlights to the person that they probably shouldn't be here. And when they self-identify out, it makes the whole thing so much easier, doesn't it?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was actually going to ask you about how to handle tough conversations, but that conversation is all of a sudden not as tough when you're both on the same page and you're both understanding of exactly what the issues are.
That's right. In fact, just so that we're clear, because we're talking about this process, a debrief has effectively 4 steps. The first of which is getting everybody to share their version of facts with the collective whole so that we can get to the proximate truth, done in a way absent judgment or blame. So for example, if I were to bring to the table in a debrief, we're on the same team, that I misappropriated $20,000 worth of our company's funds, you wouldn't immediately go, what? What were you doing? What do you think? There'd be no judgment. You leading us through this would go, okay, cool, Cujo, 20,000, good. Anything else to add? We'd just be very fact-based, very unemotional, just getting all of the facts on the tables to help us to do a substantive analysis. And when we're armed with those facts, it takes the emotion out of it. And when the fact-gathering phase is judgment-free, it allows us to have an emotion-free collection of the proximate truth. So it's actually engineered. A properly run debrief is engineered to try to keep the emotions at a minimum.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that would create an environment, and clearly does create an environment, where folks are more willing to own up to their mistakes. You've mentioned in other talks and interviews Chick-fil-A and Ritz-Carlton do a good job of empowering team members. Do you think, or do you have experience with those organizations? Do you think or know that they're creating a culture where they have debriefs, or creating a culture where mistakes are okay so that the person at the front desk at a Ritz-Carlton feels fine making certain decisions?
Yeah, I don't know how they run their day-to-day affairs right now, but I can testify to the output of it. For instance, I was speaking at a Ritz-Carlton a couple years ago. And as is the case with me, typically, I'm always scrambling to get to the next place because I'm traveling from someplace. And so I'm always the last person to show. At a conference, I get there long after the conference organizers have called it a night, and they're usually staying around late. So I get to the Ritz-Carlton in City X, and it's late, and I'm trying to go take a look at the ballroom where I'm going to be given the keynote address the next morning, and nobody's around. So I go to the restaurant, and I ask a server at the restaurant to help me to get into the grand ballroom. And I think we'd probably agree the server's job is not to manage the grand ballroom. So I'd say in 99% of the cases, the server is going to say, hey, it's not my job. Why don't you check in with whoever else, right? It's just not me. But at Ritz-Carlton, the server goes, sir, I need to figure out who has the key. I'm going to go do so. If you could just give me 5 minutes, please. I promise you I'll be back here with the key. Can I get you a water while you wait? I'm like, that's on point. And so I denied the water. The server came back probably 4 minutes later, escorts me to the grand ballroom, opens the door. So found the key, opens the door to the place, then starts to figure out how to turn the lights on. And it's clear to me, has never been in there to do the lights thing, but is going around trying to figures it out. Then says, would you like me to find somebody from IT so that you can connect to the projectors? We can test all this stuff out. I said, nope, don't need to do that. Then says, okay, is there anything else that I can do for you? I go, no, I think I'm fine. Can I get you a water? No, thank you. Very worried about my hydration. Then says, stay as long as you want. You don't need to let me know when you're done. I'll see it from the restaurant and I'll lock up whenever you're finished here. Okay, that's pretty extraordinary. And I don't know what the mechanism is that they're using to build that kind of but my guess is they're hiring from the same overall labor base that we're hiring from. And yet they're getting those kinds of results. It was extraordinary to be part of that. And I remember as a young kid working at Chick-fil-A, it was an extraordinary experience. Just the overall attitude from everybody seemed to be very positive and upbeat, and it translated to the people that came to us, did so with devotion. I used to work at the Chesterfield Mall back when Chick-fil-A was on the bottom floor. You'd come out of Sears and take a left, and I felt bad for the folks across the way, Orange Julius and Burger King, I think it was. They never had any foot traffic except for our overflow at lunch. That was it. And we were constantly working, which, some people might say, well, that's a bummer. No, it was good. If you're going to work, it's good to work. It's actually bad to be bored. We were never bored. And folks just enjoyed working with us and coming to us. And I, in turn, really enjoyed that whole dynamic. And I'd say that they're doing something exceptional, and they're consistently doing it exceptionally well.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think anyone who's experienced Chick-fil-A or Ritz-Carlton as a customer would definitely agree that the experiences there are very different than the experiences with a lot of their competitors. I find it fascinating that you're able to retell stories the way you're able to retell them, like that Ritz-Carlton story, for example. Do you have any, and you might not, but do you have any tips for how someone can become a better storyteller? It's something that I really admire, respect, especially about older generations. And I think that the art of storytelling is being lost with younger generations, myself included. I know it's not an area that you're necessarily an expert on, but do you have any thoughts, comments there?
That's a great question. Here's my summary answer. Growing up, I read a lot. I mean, I really read a lot. There was a point in my high school career where I would make it a point to read a book a day. And that was on top of whatever it was that I was supposed to be doing. And I just enjoyed the whole experience of going into Storyland and kind of losing myself. In fact, in high school, sometimes I would just read all day in class. Don't tell any of my teachers I did that. And in so doing, I think I learned better than in English class how to write. And in so doing, I do think that I learned a little bit about how to tell a story. Okay, so that's my general comment. I'd also say that from a professional standpoint, I'm always looking for places that do an exceptional job when it comes to training and helping people to advance themselves. I got a free ticket back when it cost money to attend the core course at a place called Heroic Public Speaking. And it was right after Debrief to Win came out, and I didn't have any time. I was so slammed. I didn't have any time, and I had to go for 2.5 days to Lambertville, New Jersey. And I was not looking forward to this, but because I was gifted the ticket, I felt like I had to go. And so I went, and I was very upset about it. Came away blown away. And I got a chance to learn from dance instructors how to posture oneself on stage. I got to learn from somebody at Second City how to handle questions and how to navigate sort of the improv world. And the collective experience there was so profoundly amazing and important to me that I have to highlight them. So Heroic Public, that is a place, Raj, that you can't go wrong. Heroic Public Speaking is brilliant.
I like the fact that you mentioned they're bringing in not just speakers, but folks from different areas, different experts, if you will, because you do need a piece of all of that to be a great public speaker.
Absolutely.
You need to be a performer. You need to be, of course, a speaker. You need to be able to retain information. There's a ton going on before you get on stage or you're ready to go on stage.
That's right. You want to have some plan. You want to have structure to this. And it's amazing to go and watch people speak and to recognize, having been through a program like that, where, if they'd only incorporated this element, it would have brought so much life to the presentation and engaged that much better. It's already a great talk, but these are the things that could really enhance it. So it goes back to, what role does coaching play in our lives? It plays a huge role. And what happens when you get to a certain level? As soon as you hit it, if you're not constantly pushing it, you're falling backwards again. And so these are the things, especially if communication is an emphasis item, we want to find the places that do an exceptional job of putting it all together. And this is one of the places that has really been important to me, so much so that when you join VMax Group, we send you to Heroic Public Speaking to learn from them.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also awesome that you're investing in your team members the way you are. One thing I like to ask people, because I personally just get a lot of joy and value hearing about these types of things, success stories, real world examples. Do you have any company that really comes to mind in terms of a company you've consulted with where, I don't want to say they were a mess, but things weren't going very well. You stepped in, they implemented your processes, and all of a sudden they're a totally different looking company. Do you have any examples that come to mind?
We do, and actually, my favorite stories are the local stories, like all the way down to the individual. There's a company; it's very, very large. Will remain nameless because I haven't asked for their permission to use it publicly yet. But we're talking around 6,500 employees in 2 countries, and they've noted that this one division continues to have people that go into hiring boards and get hired. And what they found is that these are all folks that have gone through the process of learning how to debrief to win, which is really learning how to accelerate their leadership skills to a degree where they're building teams that rock in the midst of whatever the disruption is. And knowing that this has been effective in a way that was not the intended outcome. Like we didn't say, hey, let's use this approach to position you for the next promotion. But the fact that it's done so to such a degree that people have been asking the question, like what's happening with this one division? That's very, very rewarding. And other companies have reported that it's led to promotions and best years ever kind of thing. And it's so rewarding, in fact, that sometimes when the Air Force calls and they ask me to come back in and teach, which that's always going to be my core tribe. Like I'll always be connected there. Dad was part of it. I was part of it. My brothers were part of the military. I actually get more fulfillment out of working with the business side that has never seen some of these principles and what it can do. That haven't general concept of yes, but hasn't seen how we do it in the high performance team world. So there's no basis of comparison when I ask, how does accountability work for you? How would you know if you haven't seen it done the way that we're measuring against? And so to bring that into a business setting has been so rewarding that I'd prefer to do it. If I've got, two events on the same day, I'll go to the business side over the Air Force and send one of the other teammates to go do it, because at least there they've already got a basis in it.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. The local company, I'm assuming you mean local to St. Louis, but you work with companies across the globe or just across the country. Will you take an assignment anywhere?
Absolutely. And so much of what we do is done virtually so that we can reach wherever it is that we need to. Most of our training sessions right now take place in North America. Most of them do. But we've got to the point now where we've got the bandwidth to be able to expand globally. And as more people find out about what it is that we're teaching, that's going to be needed here in 2025 and beyond.
What are your plans with VMax Group? Do you have goals for the organization in terms of growth and things like that?
100%. The biggest plan is to get Debrief to win in front of as many business professionals as possible, as quickly as we can. And we have a very compelling purpose. And our purpose at VMax Group is to teach and inspire real teamwork so that teams thrive in disruption, and together we keep our economy strong. And that's important because a strong economy fuels so much goodness, and not having a strong economy puts us in a really tough spot. So we're here working to help businesses to thrive so that they can contribute to a strong economy, so we can get all the benefits from that as possible. And that's why we need to get this in front of as many people as we can. So back when I was a party of one, that was hard, and I could only do so much. We've expanded our team. We've expanded how it is that we teach so that we can meet a pretty ambitious vision over the next 10 years in terms of how many people we want to get this in front of. And then we've been working on refining our programs to constantly dial them in to make them increasingly more effective as we go forward. So having a lot of people out there that are skilled in being able to teach what it is that we do is also part of the plan.
So when you mention programs, it sounds like you have different sizes of like courses or time commitments that you're offering based on what a company needs or can afford to invest in. Is that correct?
That's right. And the core concept is that you're not going to change the world with a keynote. It can open people's eyes to, but really it's about implementation. And so our fundamental foundations course, Top Gun Teamwork, it's an implementation program, about 14 weeks, 12 weeks of group coaching. We conduct those programs 4 times a year. And it is my favorite thing to do. I'm one of our coaches. I love coaching the Top Gun Teamwork Pro. I get 90 minutes per week with a group of business professionals, and I get to help them to bring Debrief to win to life and to see the transformations that take place. And then they get the feedback that we do on the back end. It's magnificent.
At a high level, Top Gun Teamwork covers a lot of the concepts that we talked about during our close to 1 hour conversation, or is there anything we missed for Top Gun Teamwork?
So the core structure is, let's figure out how to adopt a tactical mission orientation to our work. Let's not think about work as just a series of tasks that are never ending, but let's rethink it in terms of missions and what our standards are for those missions and how we're going to manage expectations, setting them, meeting them expectations for these missions. Then let's learn how to plan to achieve mission success. And we teach that. We teach how to plan. Let's learn how to communicate the plan in a way that inspires our teammates to want to give their all. Let's learn how to give top-level guidance. Let's learn how to set standards. That's one part of the program. Another part of the program is let's learn how to build and maintain a high degree of psychological safety, defined by Dr. Timothy Clark as an environment of rewarded vulnerability. Let's create the fighter-pilot culture here, wherever here might be. And then the final piece is let's learn how to de-weaponize accountability and learn to use it as a means of team learning so that we can condition ourselves to become the mentors, coaches, and teachers that we need to be as leaders, to learn our way through disruption and to build confidence in our teammates that tomorrow is going to be better than today. That's what we unpack in Top Gun Teamwork.
That sounds amazing. I can see the value there. And I think most organizations need something like that to a certain degree. So like you mentioned missions there. Just to clarify for myself and anyone listening, let's say if you have a sales organization, or let's say you have a software organization and you're lagging with sales, can a mission be considered someone going out and pitching a client, or is that too small of a process or a task to be called a mission?
It's up to us to define what our missions are. And a lot of business leaders have a hard time initially, especially without a military background, coming to grips with this concept and overthink it a bit. And what I say to somebody that's listening to this podcast, getting their first exposure to this mission idea, plant the stake in the sand right now. Just figure out what might be a mission. Mission could be trying to get somebody to buy your product. Okay, good. That's your mission. And then move forward from there. How do you plan to achieve your expectations? What are the expectations for this thing? How are we going to plan to achieve it? How are we going to measure success? How are we going to learn post-mission why this mission went the way that it did? What we might find is that the scope is too small. That was actually a subset of the real mission, or the scope was too big and there was actually 3 missions that led up to this thing that we this time defined. But that's all fine because, and if you want to just call that in the general sense a failure, that failure is going to equip us with better understanding next time around of how we're going to adopt this mission orientation. So it's actually one of the best things that could have happened to us to misidentify what a mission is this time, because next time we're going to nail it.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm glad there's a lot of flexibility there because, again, that goes against the military stereotype where it's more rigid and there's not a lot of flexibility. I really appreciate your time, Cujo. We like to end each show with what we call a hole-in-one. So your hole-in-one, and you've shared a lot, but I hope you have something else left in the tank. The hole-in-one is your greatest piece of advice you can share with anyone listening or watching that they can implement into either their life or their business today in order to improve, to get better.
Good. I'll reference the work of a dear friend of mine. His name is Les Landis. He's a consultant in St. Louis who I met when I first started this journey. He wrote a book called Getting to the Heart of Employee Engagement, which I think is a really good book. And he summarized, I think, the ethos that we have in a fighter squad and a debrief the best. So we've got to enter this thing with the assumption of positive intent. So when you and I get together, and I'm really upset about this thing that we've experienced, and all I have is my set of facts, and I know nothing about what it is that you were thinking and doing, I could come in here, make assumptions, and rush to judgment. And that could lead to a lot of this. Or I could assume positive intent and come into this thing with an open mind and curiosity about your perspective. Oh, that is such a game changer. And that's such a way to lead intentionally and to use accountability in a positive way. The assumption of positive intent, that would be my biggest recommendation and my hole-in-one for you.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate that. So just to clarify on positive intent, it's not that's not just a business setting. You can use that with personal relationships, your marriage, just you can use that anywhere, right?
Absolutely. And we should.
Thanks again, Cujo. Really appreciate it. And I know I'm going to keep positive intent at the top of my mind today and plan to start reading Debrief to Win. We'll link anywhere the show is out, your website, and then also Debrief to Win.
Wonderful. Raj, thank you very much again for the kind invitation to join you today. Thank you for the work that you're doing to help business leaders to lead effectively in a turbulent business battle space. You're doing great work. Keep it up.
I appreciate it. Thanks again.
Thank you kindly.